calling Cadieux, an animator and illustrator.
And I'm Ira Marcks. I write and draw comics, and this is a podcast about the mysterious and magical process of bringing cartoon stories to life.
Welcome to Cartoon Feelings.
And just a couple things all you listeners should know out there. If you want to write us an email at any point while you're listening or after or whenever.
Or before.
Yeah, even before, if you want to preemptively
Anytime.
get in there with some opinions. You can reach us at cartoonfeelingspodcast@gmail.com. And this is a before or after situation also. If you think you might enjoy the show, or if you have been enjoying the show, you should give us a little review over on Apple Podcasts, because as you all know, if you listen to podcasts, that helps the shows you like. And then there's some Patreon content out there as well. If you want some bonus episodes and you want to support the show. And those are all the facts I have. Well,
That's
actually,
true.
there's kind of one giant fact.
Here's one additional fact in today's episode. We're talking about... I can't tie facts into Batman. We're talking about Batman, the animated series.
Yeah, we are. And you know what? We brought a special guest. Well, she kind of brought herself, but we opened the opportunity.
Wow, that's amazing. Welcome.
Yeah.
We're super stoked to have you.
So we have Amanda Wong.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show. I'm very excited, but very nervous because I have only done 2 other podcast recordings before this, so this will be a fun
Amazing.
experience.
We try to keep this a very chill vibe also. I am a
doing great
huge
so far.
dork, not very professional in this way, so we'll keep it comfortable.
Yeah.
I think it should be chill.
Well, Amanda, would it have made you more nervous? I had a little bit I was going to do where I was going to be like, she is vengeance. She is the night. Would that have kind of just been too much spotlight? Would that have been too intense?
Maybe a little bit too much. I find people in animation were either secret theater kids, or there's someone like me who's a little basement gremlin who's please do not perceive me.
Yeah.
Wow, you're right. I never really thought of it like that, but it is. Those are the two types.
Yeah, I think that is. And honestly, if inside you, I think sometimes there are those two aspects dueling, and it's just whichever one is predominant.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Wow, this episode is so insightful already. Great, Amanda, you're doing great.
It's otherwise we would
you.
just be actors, right?
Yeah.
But instead we're
Right. There's
the
something.
theater of it all is really what I want you to look at.
It's we all want the attention, but we don't want you looking directly at us.
Yeah, I don't want you to actually know who I am. That's the number one thing.
Okay, Amanda, I thought maybe you could give us all a little background. You don't have to read your resume out loud or anything, but this is kind of a big topic we have here today. So I think you're a great fit for it because you have a very specific background, and we can kind of get into a lot of kind of shop talk. So, what do you work on?
So currently I am working on season 4 of Star Trek Lower Decks as a background painter. And I've been working as a background artist in the animation industry in Vancouver for about 10 years now. I've been in the industry in various positions for 13 years. And then previous projects I've worked on are Rick and Morty for season 4, the Netflix series of Carmen Sandiego, and My Little Pony, the movie. I've worked on some other projects, but those are the most notable ones.
Pretty notable.
That rules, yeah. I'm noting them.
Yeah.
Noting them right now.
So, our guests, we let them choose the thing they want to talk about. Some people find that very daunting because, what if you have, what's the thing you really want to get into? So you chose Batman. Maybe give us a little bit of a reason why. I think it's a great choice. I'm very excited to talk about this.
I agree. This has been wonderful. I will hold back the rest of my thoughts.
Yeah, we can all share our little backgrounds. But, why'd you pick this, and what's Batman mean to you?
Batman the Animated Series is one of my favorite television series for my entire life. I like it both when I was a child, and I really appreciate it as an adult. I think it's one of the most seminal media of Batman. I think it might actually be the best version of Batman.
Yes.
Between all the comics and all the live action movies and the different iterations that he appears in all of the other animated series. And it just seemed like a fluke in history that everything was firing on all cylinders, which happens so rarely. I think, other series that you can point to as that would happen for is Avatar: Last Airbender or something like that, where you can talk endlessly about how wonderful this series is, and the fact that it's, it's like over 30 years since the series premiered, and people still really love it and find it so genre defining. So I think there's a lot you can talk about this series.
So that is all. Man, I can't believe
Hard
it's
agree.
been 30 years. Like that's it. This is like a classic cartoon in a way at this point, which is like a bummer for me specifically, being old.
Time cannot be stopped. No, it's just it's a vintage now. You're like, to be relished and enjoyed and appreciated and like passed on.
Mm-hmm. Were you there live in real life watching this at the time, or are you not quite that? Yeah. Okay.
So growing up, my brother and I were always like more leaning towards superheroes. And then, so I was already familiar with Batman in the 80s and had a certain idea of what Batman was, even when I was a little child, because so we mostly watched Batman through a few episodes of, is it called Justice Friends or Super?
Oh, Super Friends?
Oh, like,
Super Friends. That's the one.
Justice League something. Yeah.
Could be just.
And we also watched the Adam West 1960 series, and we watched both the 1989 Batman and then Batman Returns, which I don't know how appropriate that was for a 6-year-old, but I watched it anyway. So I already had a certain idea of, who Batman was and what was his backstory and who Robin was and who was his rogues gallery, because on the 1960s Batman, you would see the Joker and the Riddler and Catwoman. So I was old enough to understand that this was a new series. And yes, I watched it in real time and had opinions of it as an 8-year-old.
Yeah, I agree. I felt like that too. I think because it was so different than anything else that was going on, it made its claim as to like, this is like a thing cartoons can be, but you didn't know that yet as a kid, right?
Yeah, because it was so different from, well, it was different enough from what was on the air at the time. It was much more mature. It was a little bit darker. I was actually I'm still kind of a wimp, and there were a lot of episodes that really freaked me out. The first episode I watched was the one that introduced Clayface. Oh, yeah. That part one. And the ending of that for an 8-year-old is terrifying.
It's true.
And I was like, this series does not talk down to little children. Where is Robin? Where are the bright colors?
The bright colors are like the blood red sunset is on the horizon,
just like the splashes of crimson illuminating the Arkham Asylum sign. The sky is bright red.
Right.
So good.
Now, Caitlin, we know you weren't born when this came out.
I was so. How dare you? But barely.
Right.
So on November 28th, 1990, I emerged into the world and I was like, nope, no, it was fine. But so I guess this aired from like 1992 to 1995 originally. And not only was I pretty young and mushy brained at that point, but that was also my parents, like we lived overseas for a few years in Turkey because my dad was in the military. And then, so I was not watching anything like on TV really generally at all. We went to movies and stuff, but like just, a lot of the stuff we were watching at home was just like whatever my parents had taped when we were still in the States. So I think I missed it then, but I closely associate this with grade school, like child, and it must have been just reruns at that point. And I also I feel in my heart when I watched this again recently and the iconic title sequence came on and I was just like, this is like, was this just on marathons every day I was homesick from school? Because I remember just sitting and just watching it all day. And that's kind of my memory of it, just seeing that over and over again.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of positive memories for it, but it was definitely a little bit after it had burst onto the scene.
I found a professionally produced documentary by DC, so I guess it's well done because they have the money. That covered a lot of the production of this. So I pulled a bunch of random little notes and a bunch of names from that to kind of give us little talking points. So I feel like you got to start with Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski. Yeah, that's how you say it. And they're the two guys who were at Warner Brothers at the time, and they kind of describe it as having like a right place, right time type of moment where they're allowed to kind of head up this project. So I thought first we could kind of talk about what Batman was becoming for everybody, because not only were they in the right place, right time, but Batman was like primed to be like kind of reinvented for the mainstream. So like, obviously I was just old enough where Batman, the Tim Burton movie, was like, I knew that was like the biggest thing that had ever happened on the planet. Because it was like you could get a glass at Burger King, which meant it was like
the world important. Is talking about this.
Yeah. So there's definitely like an aura of that movie. So, but amidst that, there's some comic book stuff. So I don't know how familiar we all are with like the Frank Miller-ness of the late 80s. Amanda's nodding her head. Did you, I'm sure not at the time, but like, have you gone back and read like The Dark Knight Returns or any kind of Frank Miller comics that sort of spurred us like more grounded, like noir Batman?
Batman the Animated Series was actually the entry point for me to start reading comics regularly. And in terms of comics, at the time, I was more of a DC girl. And I understood that there were different ages of comics. There's like a golden age, a silver age, and then what we know as the 80s would have been the Bronze Age, where they were getting away from a bit of the silliness of the 60s and 70s and reintroducing Batman as a dark character. And there were a lot of seminal stories that came out of the 80s, such as The Killing Joke by Alan Moore and, the two stories by Frank Miller, like Batman Year One and The Dark Knight Returns. So yeah, like Batman was having a time in the late 80s. It was the right time for him. And the network was extremely amenable to what they want to do with this project. And when the creative heads came and said we wanted to do a darker, more mature Batman, they're like, sure, that worked for Tim Burton, that worked for the comics, and let's go. Let's do this cartoon.
Yeah, once you start to look at the details of like some of the way the episodes play out, you can tell this is an older cartoon because I feel like the rules of what violence is in a cartoon and like what dystopians can be and like what noir influences are, the edges are more rounded than they even were in like 92. Because I remember watching this and being like, this isn't quite as moody as like the Tim Burton movie where like the Joker falls off the building and he's just like,
that was straight up terrifying.
Yeah, it's frightening.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And this is kind of that-ish, like it has the spirit of it, but it's a little different. And I want to we'll get into this a little bit further down, but some of the role of the censor in this production, I don't know if any of you came across this in the research.
I think I watched the documentary you pulled.
Did you? Okay, good. Yeah, because there's this lady who was
called
like,
The Heart of Batman.
Oh, maybe.
Documentary, anyway.
Sure, yeah, it's the DC one. That sounds like a great title for it. So a couple other, what were some of the other pieces there? Oh yeah, you listed them. Killing Joke, Alan Moore, great guy. Loved his stuff. And then pair that against like what Saturday morning and what after school cartoons were at that time. This just really stood out. And I think it's really cool that like on the show we kind of talk about like when we talk about a Disney movie and the way it speaks to like darker themes, it doesn't actually get to go as far down the road as like something like Batman did.
Yeah, I mean, I can also say I have no familiarity with the comics, essentially, just to clear that. Like, so people can talk at me about that because I am interested. But I grew up in a household where, like, my dad was very comics inspired, etc. But we didn't have them around, really, which I find kind of interesting. So, like, he's always loved superheroes and that kind of stuff and, like, comic books, but we just didn't have them for some reason. So I watched a ton of Batman stuff growing up. Did watch Batman Returns also, and it was absolutely terrifying, like, completely scarring. But the other two, like Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, which I would sincerely like to watch again with fresh adult eyes, but those were huge, especially Batman Forever in our household. So there was a passion for Batman for us. I always thought of Batman as my favorite superhero, even when I like didn't really have a lot of familiarity with any superheroes. For some reason, I was just like, he's really cool.
Yeah. So Amanda, I'm kind of curious, is being like part of an animation team, this idea of making something that's like kid friendly, like Bruce Timm in the documentary talks about this idea. It's like the show is very specifically positioned to be like playing to fans of those comics, but also appealing to kids, but not like the youngest kids, like the tween-ish kids of those comics loving people. It's like very specific. Does stuff like that come up in your work, or are all those rules kind of like all there by the time you come into stuff? Or like, do you have these type of conversations?
So the way the industry in Vancouver works is the majority of the work that we get is actually service work from the United States, from a client that is usually in LA, such as Cartoon Network or Netflix or any of the other animation studios. And normally by the time that we do production, questions about storytelling have already been locked in and decided and finalized. So I'm sure these discussions are happening, but for the purpose of my job, usually we don't deal with the writing of that directly.
Mhm.
And in terms of my current project, Lower Decks, I think it is intended to be primarily for adults. So we don't have as many restrictions as Batman the Animated Series, which I would guess was aimed probably at like 7 to 13.
Mhm.
And then the other series I worked on, I mean, it's possible that they probably did have to deal with a lot of studio notes, but it just did not happen to trickle down to where my position was, which is a lowly background artist.
Yeah. Yeah, but I feel like even there though, don't conversations come up about, I don't know, I guess I'm saying this because it happens in my work. Like when I draw something, sometimes an editor is like, that's too dark. Like don't draw it like that, or don't light something a certain way. Like when we get into the look of this show, it's so like high contrast and sparse. Like there's so few visual elements going on. I could see that have been being a conversation they were having about like, oh, the backgrounds are gonna look that dark and intense and mature, I guess. Like, does stuff like that come up with like the way you're drawing something?
So most of the design work is usually settled and locked, and the style of the show is decided by our clients in LA.
Mhm.
And then what I do as a background artist is implement the location design for the actual scene to scene shots of the episode. Again, like I'm sure these conversations have happened, but
Yeah.
they're not really germane to.
Is it a thing like you're getting like somebody literally did like a key image basically of the background you're doing, and then you're like iterating on that, or are there
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And we have in our role we have very limited restrictions on how much freedom we have. Like obviously, since we're all trained professional artists, we know that there are certain principles about lighting and color that we want to bring out to each scene, but mostly we are matching a location design that is settled by somebody else in LA. That said, one of the reasons I do really love this series is because they did have a very unique approach to the backgrounds. And I don't know how familiar your audience is with Batman the Animated Series, but what was unique about Batman the Animated Series is they actually started painting their backgrounds on black paper instead of white paper, and then bringing out the lights instead of darkening things.
Mm-hmm.
And I always loved the effect that had on the entire series. And when I heard that HBO Max was doing a new Batman series to tie into the Robert Pattinson Batman, and Bruce Timm was involved, I was like, even though we've all moved on to Photoshop and we're not doing things by paper, they should make everyone start with a black canvas just for tradition.
Oh yeah, totally. We often talk about kind of like the loss of traditional work, and I think it's things like that get lost in the mix. Like not certain tools just like bring out certain things in you, right?
Yeah, there are no other show. Even now, I'm not well versed necessarily in like a lot of what is animated on TV now. I mean, there's so much too, whatever. Like I'm 32 years old. I'm not necessarily seeing all of it. So hopefully I'm not knocking it as something that's out there and is like super cool. But like nothing looks like this to me. I can't think. It feels so unique. And I didn't know until researching this, actually. I guess I just never thought about it and hadn't revisited the series like pretty much since it was on. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that that's how they did it. And then I read that somewhere, or I heard it in the documentary, and I was just like, oh my God, like, what? It's a completely reverse, well, it's like, there are shots in some of the episodes I watch where it's like, you know, Batman opens the door and it's a dark room, but there's just some highlights of like the stuff that's in there, and I'm like, that's all they painted. Because the rest of it is black. That's so cool. And even I had noticed, I was paying a lot of attention to it because I was just like, yeah, is it always nighttime here or what? Like, you know, it's so dark. And then I watched an episode of Joker's Favor about Joker torturing this poor man. And this guy like moves away to it. He moves his family away to a different state to kind of like escape the Joker, sort of. And you see some shots of him like in his suburban neighborhood with his like wife and son, and the sky's like bright blue and everything, but it's still so kind of moody and fits the tone of the show because they talked about like the colors are just going to naturally be affected by the black, you know? So they're all sort of brought down tonally a little bit. And so even then you're like, still looks weird. Like it doesn't look like cheerful and cute. Exactly. It was really nice.
My main memory, not my main memory, but a big memory of watching this on TV at home was mostly the glare from the windows catching the screen because it was so dark. I'm just seeing like the Black Mirror-ish reflection of light. Because most cartoons, again, so bright, you're not, the TV isn't acting like this like reflective surface. But this cartoon, it was just like, I'm like, I need to draw the curtains. My mom's not going to let me because it's like 3:30 in the afternoon. But
I need a cinematic experience like for this.
And that was like just one of those little things about this show that even when you're a little kid and you don't really get this idea of like, they painted it on black paper. Isn't that cool? You're like, there's something totally different about this like half hour that's going on.
Sort of like what the YouTubers Red Letter Media say. It's like, you might not notice, but your brain did.
You feel it.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So early on, of course, like I point out that this is like this documentary that we've watched is like a DC production. And just like we talk about this with Walt Disney stuff, it's like they all paint the perfect picture of how this masterpiece just sort of like opened to the world and everything was different after that, which like I agree is true. But it's also, there's probably some like messier truth behind the scenes. But anyway, Mike Carlin, the creative director, says this little thing that like, I think we probably all want to be true about anything we work on. And it's like, every creative project is a puzzle. And this is one of those ones where every piece was there. And it's like, if that may or may not be true, but you can feel it in some of the early concept art they show. Like it all seemed to be really locked in right away with this sort of
and
thing.
I think some of like what he was talking about there, which I think is true from my like limited external observation, it's like the right people were involved. They were designing the right sensibility. Like the music was amazing and the composer was amazing. And it was just like everybody was exactly right. Like everything just came together in a way where nobody was like, the show's so good, but the music kind of sucked. Like, no, it didn't have that, you know?
Right.
It was just all like designed impeccably, like faithful to the source material, like all, just checking all the boxes.
Yeah, I guess the launching pad, I don't know if you have this with stuff you work on, but like, well, Star Trek maybe feels like this a little bit. It's like feels like Star Trek is just so back right now in a way that it wasn't when they were doing the J.J. Abrams movies. Like that didn't really seem to catch, but like TV Star Trek is back. I don't know if you like felt like that when you started working on Lower Decks. It's like the momentum is already going. And the way with this, the Tim Burton movie kind of like got the ball rolling. Frank Miller did. And then the show just kind of like picked up a broader audience with the vibe.
To get a little bit philosophical, I think a common question or a common debate that nerds have with each other is why is some piece of media so good and so timeless, and why is this thing that came later on just doesn't feel as good? And then usually nerds will come to some conclusion where they're like, it was this individual, it was this writer. And I agree with you. I think sometimes the conditions are perfect for this moment of history where you make this really good thing, and you can't really recreate those elements, even if you have some of the same team. In the case of Batman, the animated series, not only did they have the right people on the team who were very, very passionate about making a very particular point of view of Batman, but they also came at a time when they had a studio that was willing to work with them and not give them so many notes and understood what they were trying to do. And they had an audience that was very receptive after the Tim Burton Batman. And I can tell that this is true because I have seen later work by the senior creatives of this project, such as Bruce Timm and Paul Dini. And to be honest, I don't think it's as strong. Like I've seen Bruce Timm's directed Killing Joke. And just by having a different audience that was more adult, I feel like he was more vulnerable to his excesses, which wouldn't necessarily be there for Batman the Animated Series, which is aimed at children. And no offense if Mr. Deeney is listening to me, but I
God,
feel
I
like
hope he is. That'd be cool for our show.
I feel like the subsequent work that he's done, most people are not as effusive as they are for Batman the Animated Series. And I think this is true of a lot of other popular things in pop culture. For example, unfortunately, like everyone loves Avatar: Last Airbender, and then later on, Legend of Korra, for like various reasons, whether it's like political struggles or the network or the creative team,
had a lot of the wrong pieces for this, I think. Yeah.
And I think the same thing would apply to something like Star Wars. Like in the past, people are like, oh, the prequels are not as good as the original trilogy because it was all done by George Lucas and they didn't have this person or that person. The sequels would be much better because George Lucas is less involved. Oh no, we don't like these either. And I think we just have to accept that sometimes all the elements are there in place to create something wonderful. And you may or may not be able to make it happen again, but it's very difficult. It's very rare.
I think I have this is such a philosophical argument, and I hope it's not straying too far. I'm going to try to keep it Batman endearing, but I think this is super interesting, and I love that you brought it up. Because I think, like, that's the challenge that we get into now. Well, and this is directly relevant because we have so much stuff that's, like, the same IP over and over again. And, like, obviously Batman has had that so much. So it's a peak example of that. But that's what is interesting is that it's so hard to, like, you literally are just, like, you're being handed this, like, massive legacy and then you have to do your best. But that's, like, another weight that you don't normally have to contend with. So it's, like... yeah, we could be confident. Like, well, George Lucas, like, needed the collaboration with those other people. Oh, okay, by himself it's not as good. And then later, oh, this still is not that great. Oops. And some of it is like, well, you're trying to hit this impossible target sometimes where it's like, well, what do we do with this? Like, I have a whole preconceived thing that I need to do. I don't know. In a way, maybe Batman the Animated Series, like... because other Batman stuff had happened that had such a strong flavor, they were like, okay, but if we do it like really comic style and we like speak to those original fans and it's like not silly, we'll actually like they almost were reinventing it in a way. And I'm sort of like making this up a little bit just because I didn't actually read the original comics, but just based on what people have said about it. Well, they were like, oh my God, like it takes the comics seriously. It's not like so silly. Like, oh, it is reinvented because it hadn't really been done before. But at the same time, it was also like, this is a sincere love letter to the original thing, which is like part of the reason that it was so strong.
Yeah. And I think there must have been, I have no idea what these early scripts look like or what their like kind of thesis was, but I think they really do kind of capture the noir idea with this so well because it becomes, in the way that Adam West one wasn't, it becomes about Gotham, and Gotham corrupts like everybody in it. So like even all the villains, like these are some of the best villain stories of all time. Some of these episodes, the Clayface one, I love that. Like the Mr. Freeze, and they're all kind of victims of this scenario, this place. Gotham is just like, I mean, it's the character. Gotham is a character.
He's a guy.
Show. But I think that general idea and fighting for that. And I want to talk a little bit about like the censor. Her name was Avery Coburn, and they bring her up right at the top of this documentary about how she's kind of this like unspoken figure that's like, I get what you're trying to do and I'm going to help you tell those stories. I would just love to see what those documents she had that convinced her to be like this cool censor.
Yeah, she like described herself in this documentary. She's in it, and she was like, "I just consider myself more of an editor." And I was like, "Oh, I wonder how many people have that job and feel that way about it."
Yeah, that's a cool way to look at something that probably is otherwise sounds way more boring. But...
yeah. So sadly, I was a nerd that got on the internet immediately when my household got internet access, which was when I was in high school, and in the late 90s. People from official crews were much more free with their words, and in general, there were definitely people who viewed broadcasting studios standards and practices as the enemy of creativity. So there was definitely more bitterness towards it than what was in the documentary that you listed.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can find this image on the internet anymore, but at one point Bruce Timm did a very funny drawing of Batman, the Joker, and Catwoman. And the point of the drawing was there were elements that broke every rule of broadcasting standards and practices. Like Catwoman's in her lingerie, Batman's shooting a hole through the Joker is holding a crucifix. It was just like very silly.
I'm glad you described it because my mind
that.
went wild when you said that. I was like, whoa.
That said, there's also a lot of positive anecdotes about when the censorship to make this children's media actually improve the stories. Like, I'm sure there's lots of times where they wanted to push a story further and then they were not able to. But a good example they gave is the episode Robin's Reckoning by Paul Dini. Because originally in the script, you would have seen Robin's parents be killed on screen, and that was not allowed. And the creative problem solving they came up with was that they would film his parents, who are acrobats, on the trapeze, and you would see the swing go off the camera, and then there's a dramatic pause where the music makes the scene extremely tense, and then when the rope comes back, the rope is frayed and you don't see the parents. So that way, if you are a child, you can come to the conclusion of what has happened, that his parents have fallen to their death. And visually, and as a filmmaker, I think, and the staff agrees with this, that this storytelling is more effective than if they would have shown the deaths of his parents on screen. So in that way, this is what I meant earlier by sometimes by making this primarily for children, it did actually make this series stronger than when you give someone like Bruce Timm carte blanche to do what he really wants in animation.
Yeah.
And because I've seen his Harley Quinn animated film, and it kind of falls to the excesses of, what adolescent boys want, of like, cheeky, like Harley is in like various states of undress, and like there's like fart jokes and stuff like that. So
yeah, it's like sometimes you really do need the collaborative vision where people will be like, maybe not that though. And I think you're right. I saw a clip. It was in this documentary, and I don't know which episode it was, and I didn't actually watch it on its own. But there was some episode where, for some reason, Batman like is seeing his parents die. I don't know if he's like having a vision, because it was shown. It's like very dreamlike kind of thing, and it was honestly so evocative that just this one clip that they briefly showed in this documentary really stuck in my head. And like, his parents are walking, and he's like trying to chase somebody, can't catch them. They're not responding to him calling out.
Yeah.
And they walk into this like dark tunnel, and then like an earthquake happens basically around Batman, which is so poignant and good. Like, that's really good. And then this gun comes up out of the ground, and there's like red stuff coming out of the tip of it, which I think is supposed to be like dirt, like, but it looks like blood.
Yeah.
And it like fires, and Batman's like, ah. And I was just like, my God, like, you're not seeing any violence actually, but this is horrifying.
Yeah.
Like, and as a kid, I feel like I must have not seen this episode, frankly, because I think it would have been seared into my memory. And that, it's like, something is horribly wrong. It's so much more powerful than it would be if it was just like, bang, bang, like, here are two dead people.
Right.
Even, I feel like kids, honestly, are kind of like, yeah, nah, that is scary. But this one, I was just like, I'm feeling the emotion. Like, something is deeply wrong. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff that you almost... It can be really annoying, super annoying even as a creative, when people are like constantly giving you feedback that you don't necessarily agree with, or like just like a million notes on stuff like that. But sometimes it actually genuinely is good that you have those walls that you have to navigate around.
Yeah, knowing it, like someone questioning, is this choice the right choice for the story? Like kind of playing to what's the bigger purpose? Who's this for? Is it serving them correctly? Like, I think that I guess that can strip creativity of something for sure, creative process. But it also, like, I'm sure there's a million more examples, like you were just describing, Amanda, of the trapeze, of it happening off screen, and things like there's one kind of violent gunshot scene. It's like the Jim Gordon, like they make the one fight for the one thing. They're like, we're going to do it, and it's going to be for this important character. And it makes that one scene so much more important than if every episode had like that type of violence. It would just become like watered down. There's so many like great moments in the show, because I'm sure to get those moments, they probably had to like really fight. Like the weird, like surreal, I think it's like the Mad Hatter episode, like Per Chance to Dream.
Oh yeah, I watched that one.
Oh, I love that episode.
Yeah, like where it's just the layers of the storytelling with that is something that maybe it would be parodied in like Tiny Toons or something, but it was playing it for real dramatic tension. It was like, that's not a kid thing to do, but they make it a kid thing all of a sudden.
Actually, a lot of these episodes feel like Twilight Zone episodes to me.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, nobody ever cites that as an inspiration. I don't know if it is directly one, but like the Mr. Freeze one feels so Twilight Zone-y to me with his like, he's narrating at the beginning and at the end. He's like talking to himself about his wife and you're just like, whoa, like this is so much.
Yeah. Mr. Freeze is the one that people are familiar with Batman the Animated Series. They always cite that episode, and for good reason, because Heart of Ice won an Emmy for the writing. And this animated series actually created the backstory of Mr. Freeze that became canon for both the comics and then in movies, because Batman Robin also did the Mr. Freeze story to like great effect. And because I had watched the Adam West series before watching this series, Mr. Freeze appears in 2 or 3 episodes in that series as well. And then there's really nothing to that character. Like he's basically just a guy with a cold gimmick and he has lots of ice puns. And then for them to be like, but what makes him icy?
Right.
Could it be a metaphor for something?
How did he get that?
Maybe he's cold inside because his wife is dead.
Yeah. I rewatched that one, and when the snow is falling and we cut to Batman and he's looking down, I can remember seeing that for the first time.
Yeah.
And just knowing that it vibrated with like resonance in a way that I wasn't understanding, because I was like, I'd never seen storytelling like that
That's
before.
Emotionally impactful, the way his like voice is so dead and sad and like effective in that way. Also, fun fact, this has nothing to do with the emotional quality, but I thought it was cool that Mike Mignola from Hellboy did the design for him.
Oh, really?
That was
That's
something
awesome.
else they just randomly dropped into the documentary, and I was like, what? But that's so cool. And he did a great job because the design is awesome.
Yeah, I wonder if he did like Scarecrow too, because that also feels like a Mike Mignola type of character. He was like a big guy in that era too. I remember, I mean, they were just still in the comics. There were no movie adaptations or anything, but I remember wanting a Hellboy like show or movie, because there's something very cartoonish about it, but also so dark. And this show was the only other thing like really doing that for kids. Yeah. So I think that Twilight Zone thing makes a lot of sense. I never really thought of it that way. It's like Gotham is this like dimensional portal where only bad things can happen. And it's like the city is playing all these characters against each other in like these weird ways.
That's why you constantly have like parents just like walking around with their kids like nothing is happening, but like down the street people are shooting each other with like submachine guns, like driving car. Like it just doesn't make any sense.
There's so we know that Shirley Walker is the composer for this. I don't know if either of you read any about this, but Steven Spielberg is tied to Warner Brothers at this time because he's got his weird like Tiny Toons project, like his weird little obsession with animation, despite all his other cinematic accomplishments, is like so interesting to me.
Thank you, Mr. Spielberg.
But he brings the orchestra that they're working with, right? Like this is like Spielberg already he's like, cartoons have an orchestra. They're like, oh, actually they don't usually. He's like, these do, mine do.
He was really bringing a cinematic sensibility to the TV stuff, which normally didn't have that.
Does he play a role in the production in any other point in this other than really just kind of like providing those resources? I didn't really come across.
I don't think so.
Anything else about him? I was just curious.
That one I'm not too sure about, but I do agree with you that the music for this is part of what makes this series so great, because not only did they have an original score for every episode, but they also introduced things like leitmotifs for the different villains, which I always loved. I love every theme for every villain. Like I love the violin theme for Catwoman. I like the xylophone for the Joker. And then for the episode that you mentioned earlier with the Mad Hatter, Perchance to Dream, one of the things that clues you in that something is wrong is because normally Shirley Walker's theme for Batman is played on the horn section, but then when he's going up to the bell tower, they're actually playing the Mad Hatter theme on the horn section, so then your brain's like, something's off.
That's so cool.
And then to also bring it back to the censorship issue in that script originally, Bruce Wayne has decided he doesn't want to live in a world where he is not Batman, and he is going to jump off the bell tower. And then the Mad Hatter, as Batman in his dream, says, Like, what if this doesn't work? And in the original script is like, then I'll see you in hell, which you obviously can't do for a children's after school program. So they changed it to then I see you in my nightmares, which makes more sense for the theme of that episode.
That rules, because I noticed when he said that nightmares line and I was like, interesting, but it feels like you wanted to say something else here.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's funny that when you say that I'll see you in hell line, I always think of Harrison Ford in Empire Strikes Back when he's like riding out to save Luke. He's like, I'll see you in hell, which opens up an idea of like, does hell exist as an idea in Star Wars? Like that phrase is so kind of a loaded thing. It would make sense not only like you don't need to hear a kid saying it, but also like what are the religious circumstances of Gotham? Like
it's like we don't ever see any, do we? I'm sure there's some kind of cult worship thing somewhere in Batman history.
Actually, yeah.
Like,
is there a cult episode?
I don't know, but I don't know if they ever just like go to the. Surely he goes to church. This is a tangent, but I do want to say, speaking of that line, Kevin Conroy is Batman, and I think. I was just like, I don't know if this is true. I was going to say, I think we can all agree. I don't want to speak for everybody.
No, yeah.
But it was when I fired this up again and he said one line, I was like, oh, yeah, that's Batman. And even like I mentioned, I mean, my sister and I watched Batman Forever probably 10 million times growing up. We had it on VHS. Absolutely loved it. And the other ones, like Batman Returns much less frequently because it was so scary. And Batman and Robin. And like, honestly, I think I don't really remember noticing that they're all different guys playing Batman in those movies. I think it took me a long time to be like, oh, it's different guys. Because I wasn't really attached to the personification necessarily. But I was like, this is what Batman is. He's so cool. Like what he said, he just sounds tough, but then he's also like kind of tender and relatable when he's just like being Bruce Wayne or whatever. I don't know. There's just something about him that's so charismatic and perfect for the role that I was like, if I had to pick one, like this would be my number one iteration of Batman is like Kevin Conroy doing Batman the Animated Series Batman.
Yeah.
Just so good.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think, first of all, one of the things that makes this version of Batman so great is that, one, Kevin Conroy is using a distinct voice for Bruce Wayne and a different voice for Batman. Later on, when the series was retooled into the New Adventures of Batman, where they redesigned everything, and then the series went on to the Warner Brothers network instead of for Fox Kids. He loses that, and I think it makes the series weaker. They explain it in the story by saying that Batman has grown colder, and he's sort of dropping the Bruce Wayne persona. But I'm like, no, that's part of what made Batman look so great. That and his weird character design with his mustard yellow shirt and his brown blazer. But anyway, Bruce Wayne, iconoclast. None of the other live action actors really modulate their voice to differentiate, except for Christian Bale, which I'm pretty sure he did get the idea from Kevin Conroy, but I don't think he does it as well, especially towards the later movies like The Dark Knight.
Yeah, it's a little cartoonish for how seriously they're doing it.
The other thing I think that people, that other media often forget about Batman is that Batman in this version is actually very compassionate, because there's like a meme idea of what Batman is, in that he is, he's a fascist billionaire who just wants to beat up poor people. And I'm like, maybe in some versions, maybe in some comic stories, but in this version, he cares about the villains. And there is a really, really wonderful moment at the ending of Harley's Day Out where he has compassion for Harley Quinn, who is being returned to Arkham Asylum because she failed her release by falling back on her old habits, and then he gives her back the dress that she was going to buy, and he says, I had a bad day too once. And I'm like,
it's tender. So nice. He has a tenderness to him.
The character of Batman, it's really interesting to hear voice actors, directors, like people that have to craft their own iteration of him talk, because there's usually a point where they make a choice where, like, the thing I figured out was Batman, he's Batman, Bruce Wayne is the disguise. Or sometimes they go the other way around. I actually think maybe Tim Burton, the original 89 Batman, is inverted, where it's like, actually, the thing I figured out was it's a story about Bruce Wayne and Batman is the facade, which you can feel in that 89 one. Batman Returns, you don't really get a lot of Bruce Wayne, and I feel like the character is set aside to deal with the villains. But on this show, I think even Kevin Conroy probably has a moment where he's like, I decided Batman is the character and Bruce Wayne is the disguise that he puts on. You just don't really hear a lot of characters talked about in that way by the people that have to like represent them artistically.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I don't know what
like Superman doesn't have that really. It's like a little more clear like who the disguise is, whereas Batman it's kind of, it can be hazy.
That might be the appeal, but also like maybe if I could be critical, I don't know, like Batman is open to interpretation, and so you're gonna get versions of Batman that feel like wildly off the mark to you, maybe, but like I think the reading is there. And I'll be honest, I only saw the first half of the most recent Batman with Robert Pattinson, just because we just got tired halfway through because we're so...
It's 3 hours long. And then it is a long
We just didn't go back and finish it, but I actually, like, I want to finish it, so now I need to remind myself to actually do that. But, like, that one is a very interesting take from what I saw on Batman, where it's like, Batman's kind of just a weird guy. Like, there's a lot going on.
He's just a weirdo. He's
a weird guy in this one. And I was just like, I find this interesting. But then, like, that's why he's so appealing to me in this one, is like, yeah, I mean, if you had to describe him, I guess literally he's a weird guy, but like, he's kind of just like a dude, and he's like wanting to go out on dates, like wanting to date Selena Kyle, and like trying, going around town and doing stuff, but then also, I gotta stop that crime. And you're just like, yeah, I get that. Like, you seem cool.
I don't know if you saw this issue, because it was being passed around social media, but sometime last year DC put out a special Pride issue of comics, and one of the stories was partially written by Kevin Conroy, and it details his experience playing Batman, but it also reveals that part of what went into his role as Batman was because Kevin Conroy is queer, and he describes having to be in show business as a queer man when the business was much less unfriendly and society was much less unfriendly to that. And he was like, I completely understand a man who has to play two parts of himself. And I channeled all of that into my performance as Batman. And I only found out that Kevin Conroy was queer only a few years ago. And then reading that story, I'm like, I never knew that he put any of that into his performance, which, retroactively, it completely makes sense. But I'm like, I love this story. And maybe after this, I will send it to you.
Yeah. I remember seeing that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was it might have been me subconsciously recalling that. But when I was watching the doc and watching some of these episodes and thinking about Batman as like a creative property you can use to be artistic with, it will live on forever, because it is that discussion of like, who am I? And it is never resolved. Like, this show is about like, what's my identity as a creative? Like, if I value myself most as a creative, is my morality tied to my work? Like, am I only good if I do good work? Like, that you can get really fucked up with yourself if you get too tied to your work, whether it be a creative process or any job. And I feel like Batman is that. Like, he's kind of too caught up in his work.
Oh, that's totally true.
It messes him up.
Some people see that strongly, and you can see when you're watching a Batman, where it's like, I think that's the interesting thing of like, who's Bruce Wayne, like who's Batman, like who's the real guy or whatever. And then there's ones where he's just like, I'm Batman all the time because I'm like, because I'm crazy, or because I'm working too hard, or however the person wants to interpret it.
Yeah.
But I do think that might be a big pull of Batman. It's just like, I'm also passionate about my work and I do it for a good reason, but it makes me tired. It's like really hard.
And the room for like this idea of weirdness, like whenever I think of the 89 Batman, I think of the scene where, what's her name wakes up and he's hanging upside down in the doorway, and it just shows that and then cuts. Like, no one talks about it. It's just like, oh, he has these things that have developed from this identity. I just love little moments like that when they represent that with Batman, because no other character is really like that, where they kind of like they bring the idea of a bat into them and kind of become it.
Yeah.
Like they become weirdly anthropomorphized in their mind.
It's because they're just skulking in the shadows all the time. Which, again, it's something that a lot of us do as creatives.
Yeah. Like just talking about it makes me want to like work on a Batman comic someday. But I never thought about that really before you really think about the way people like deal with him. It's not like he's a blank slate, but it's this perfect like parameter.
There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. Batman is cool. That's not the concluding thought. The episode
end of the episode. Yeah, no. Batman is cool. Batman is fun.
Can we jump back to the voice acting a little bit? Because I know just like people working in their own spaces has become even more of a thing. And they point out in the documentary we were watching that the voice acting was all recorded like in one room. And they talk about the opportunities to like really act and react with each other, like leaving space in ways that, because even simple things like editing a podcast, you want to cut silence. But the truth is like people need that to think. And I feel like cartoons probably lean more towards like rapid fire dialogue. Because when I go back and watch this now, there's a lot of space, whether it be like the soundtrack drops out or like characters just sort of like taking a moment to listen. I love it.
They take their time to like walk across the room and stuff. That's definitely something, you know, it's like very moody because of that.
Yeah.
And then to pivot about the voice acting, so many elements went into making this such a great series, and one of it is definitely the voice acting. And then in that documentary that you mentioned, they give a lot of the credit to the casting director, Andrea Romano, because she pulled a lot of wonderful actors for this series who were not traditional trained voice actors. They were classical stage performers. Like, I only found out 2 years ago that the Penguin was played by Paul Williams, and I'm like, Paul Williams from the Phantom of the Paradise, really? Him? Okay. And not to mention Mark Hamill for the Joker. He's such a good Joker.
Yeah, he's great. And I think they say they went through like a lot of people, and then they like got the guts to ask him.
I think they did like almost 4 episodes with Tim Curry before someone above them said, like, I don't like Tim Curry, so they had to find a new actor for it.
Imagine saying that.
That's gotta be the only tough break Tim Curry's ever had. I could never say a false word about Tim Curry. But yeah, Mark Hamill's incredible in this. And like, I'm far from the first person to say it, but he's just an amazing voice actor. Like, it's like ridiculous how good he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was just perfect for that. But I remember finding out when he was the Joker, I don't know, like 10 years ago or something probably at this point, and just being like, what? Like, it like really changed my perspective. I don't know, it was mind-blowing to me. And it was just such a cool thing to find out.
Yeah. I also like this version of the Joker because, one, he's extremely playful. He has lots of different laughs, and he's very funny as a character. But he's also really frightening as a character. Like that episode that you mentioned earlier, Joker's Favor, where the entire episode revolves around him just torturing this random nobody because he's just like, I think it'll be fun. Let's just make this guy's life a living hell.
Yeah, he calls him and is like, oh, you changed your name to this? Like, don't think you fooled me. I know you live at this address now. And it's just like, oh, God. Oh, my God. This is
and he's like, you owe me. I let you go after you were mean to me on the road, and I need you to come and open this door. And he's like, you've been hunting me for 4 years just to open a door. And he's like, well, look at the size of the cake, man. She can't bring it in on her own.
And then, of course, naturally, he was totally going to kill that guy, actually.
Yeah.
Sticking him to the... Well, and also, too, I was really stricken by that episode because at the end, Batman and this guy, I think his name is Charles, they hatch a funny plan to scare the absolute shit out of the Joker. And so Charles is pretending like, I have to like kill the Joker to like to protect my family with like one of the Joker's bombs or whatever. And Batman's in on it, and they're like, but the Joker is legitimately like freaking out and calls to Batman for help. And I was like, this is so interesting. It's not like I've never seen this before, but it's just like, you think of the Joker as somebody maybe who's like always machinating, you know, or then trying to get out of there. But in this one, it was like, he's basically crying for his mom, essentially. And is like legitimately concerned about dying. And I was just like, wow, okay. So even that's like, it's not very cartoonish in its level of complexity, even though that's like, it's somewhat simple, but... Yeah, other shows would not have done that. They just would have had him keep being a jerk, basically, or like keep being really self-assured.
There is an episode about a similar theme called The Man Who Killed Batman, who is about also a nobody, albeit a nobody who is a henchman called Sid the Squid, who thinks he killed Batman, and then the entire Gotham underworld also thinks he kills Batman. And then this deeply offends the Joker, who goes after this random nobody because he's like, nobody kills the bat but me. And he has a funeral for Batman, and it is hilarious. And some of my favorite stories in the series are the ones that are about like random nobodies. And I'm like, I'm so glad that they had the freedom to do little one-off episodes like that. I think it is much more difficult to do it in today's climate for animation because the production order for seasons, especially for streaming, is much, much shorter. So you do get fewer filler episodes for like where the characters go to like the beach or like play baseball and stuff. But then you also lose little character episodes like this where they're just like the Joker tortures some random nobody, which were always my favorite.
Yeah, those are memorable. Like those are the memorable ones a lot of the time. Sometimes sure, like, oh, people say, oh, it's filler episode, whatever. But I think it's about Star Trek too, actually. We don't have to talk about Star Trek,
absolutely.
But I'm very passionate about Star Trek. But it's like and I haven't watched a lot of the new Star Trek shows either. I've watched Lower Decks and I've watched Strange New Worlds, and that's pretty much it. And I'm loving it. But like there were so many good filler episodes of that where it's like really what I love about Star Trek is just hanging out. And like so I just want to hang out with the show. So the fact that you've rewarded me with 1,000 episodes of the show is great. Even the bad ones, doesn't matter. And then every now and then you'll get one where it's just like, I don't know, Data and Geordi, like, hang out.
Yeah.
And they...
Yeah, or like, they help Wesley try to get a date.
Yeah, that's it. Like, or
the entire senior staff help him try to get with this girl.
Or like some of the best ones, like, we're going to go on the holodeck and play Sherlock Holmes for an episode. It's like, I don't get those anymore as much. So I think that's like a very valuable aspect of storytelling that we're missing. And it is having that, like, when was the last time, I don't know, you watched a Batman thing and it was largely about some random guy you'd never heard of before. Yeah. Like that doesn't seem to really happen anymore.
So I noticed in this series, there are mostly two kinds of stories. There are the kind which have to do with the more grounded aspects of Batman and have to do with like the criminal underworld of Batman, where the main villain is someone like Rupert Thorne. I don't know if Rupert Thorne is in the comics, but he's definitely in the series, and he's basically just like a human, non-supernatural crime boss. And then there are the other ones that have to do with the Rogues Gallery. And then when I was a child, obviously I don't care about Rupert Thorne. I don't care about like guys on a dock muttering about shipments. Right. But I was always willing to turn up for like Poison Ivy or like the Penguin or Joker or something like that. And I feel like if they were to make a Batman series now for children, they would have cut out all the like typical like underworld smuggling stories. And I think that is a shame. Yeah. Probably for the production crew, a 65 episode order does sound like a very tall order.
Yeah.
Like it sounds very, very stressful. Generally, the seasons I work on are like a 10 episode order, and that's already like pretty stressful. So I don't know how they did it. Well, I do know how they did it because they had different animation houses working on the episodes at the same time. And then if you're trained in animation, even if you're not trained in animation, you can kind of tell when they have like an A team and a B team.
Right.
The A team being Tokyo Movie Shinsha, which handled all the beautiful animated episodes like the Clayface episode, because you're like, this just looks like friggin' Akira.
Yeah.
The top quality.
Exactly.
I do, and I remember reading, I think it's a footnote like in the Wikipedia page where they're like, and they fired this studio because they kept doing an inconsistent job. And I was like, whoa, like I'd never thought about that. I knew, they're farming it out to like, a bunch of, and they list, there's so many studios they list, like a big chunk of people that worked on this show. But it was just kind of funny for them to single out this one and be like, and they were fired. I was like,
I bet it was ACOM.
I think it was.
I always read.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, it's daunting to look at like these factors of like a detail of like writing 3 scripts a month for a thing like this. I like the comparison of Star Trek because like if you think like that's a show about a fleet, it's like about a group of people. In the way like Batman is at its best when it paints a picture of the whole city and the way everything is intertwined, because
Gotham
that's
is
like
the Enterprise.
Yeah, it kind of is, right? It's like this big system that you kind of you're not powerful enough to stop it at any point. And like at the bottom of all of that are like the civilians or like the people like Bruce Wayne, the tragedy of like Robin's parents, Bruce Wayne's parents, like these just normal people like that. those are the stakes of the show that you wouldn't get, especially when we were kids and you're watching a lot of Disney movies, these like heroes' journeys about everything kind of pivots around like this one central character. Batman is cool because there's room for everybody, and it just makes everything so much more dramatic to know that like these are kind of like people living. This isn't a Looney Tunes world. Like an anvil doesn't fall from a roof, really. Like people can die.
Batman
and
jumps
be
off a
shot
bell tower,
like
he will die, even if it's a dream. Like he's gonna squish at the bottom in a realistic, gross way that will not be pictured because of obvious reasons.
Yeah. It feels like when you get to the end of an episode, like something is different about either a villain or Batman. And I know everything's kind of episodic. It's not like there's not like this big overarching storyline, but I do remember feeling like something was changed at the end of an episode in a way that like other cartoons weren't doing, right?
Yeah. That's like the impact of the end of the Heart of Ice episode. Like, Mr. Freeze is feeling emotions. Like he has been on a journey, and you feel that.
Some of my favorite episodes are the villain origin episodes because they're all so psychological, and they weren't afraid of leaving an episode end tragically or sadly. And they're like, children can handle this. Like, I love the introduction of the Mad Hatter. He has wonderful lines in both the Mad Hatter where I guess like in modern times, he would be considered a little bit of an incel because he's just so in love with this girl who has a fiance, which is not cool.
Like classic villain behavior.
You know, you can still relate to him. You're like, oh, he's like so lonely. And, you know, you still feel a little bit when he goes off the deep end. Like, you know, don't do that. But like, I can see how he got there. And then even in the follow-up episode, Perchance to Dream, he has this wonderful line where Batman asks why he even went through this whole trouble of creating this perfect dream world for him. And he's like, don't you get it? You ruined my life. I was willing to give you anything in your life just to keep you out of mine. And the way that the voice actor says it is so wonderful and so heartbreaking. And yeah, there's so many episodes that end like that and make you feel something. I also, like I mentioned Clayface.
Yeah.
Clayface is a wonderful character introduction. And then my favorite episode is actually the Two-Face two-parter because it's just so tragic. And it ends with Harvey Dent having this breakdown because he can't make decisions without his little coin. And it shows that, you know, he's completely psychologically broken, which is not something that, you know, he chose as an individual. Like, I think I'll just have like a good bad gimmick and make my henchmen do that. And then they're able to take this like silly concept and make this beautiful story about a man who was too proud to step down from the election campaign to get mental health help. And then ends up getting half his body blown up in one of their chemical factories. They have so many of those in the city.
That's the main industry there.
Yeah, it's true. It's like, what are these for? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. That and abandoned theme parks. They just have so many. They're like if Orlando like went out of business.
Yeah, it was fully abandoned.
The Two-Face, it's great because he's kind of a Frankenstein's monster. There's like lightning crashing in a window and like skewed camera angles, like when he comes out of that room. But then when so you pair that with like the scene when Batman throws all the coins and he's down on his hands and knees, like looking for he's so pathetic.
Yeah.
Like, we did a Tex Avery episode last time and we talked about like characters like Bugs is cool because he's so confident and Daffy's like wild and crazy. But when characters are pathetic, that's like that's pretty mature for like kids cartoons.
Yeah, it's not really funny.
Yeah,
no, it's not funny at all.
Yeah, so you can't play it for a gag exactly unless you're being very over the top. Like like most,
like
you just feel bad.
It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for children. It's uncomfortable to watch as an adult.
Yeah.
So random fun fact, as I mentioned before, so this series was done by multiple animation studios, and then the best of the best was Tokyo Movie Shinsha, which only did a handful of episodes. One of the episodes they did was actually Two-Face Part 1, which I always thought was an interesting choice because the first part is much less action-oriented than the second part. But because they used this animation studio, it's so great because when you're watching Part 1, there's so many close-ups of his face, and the animation of his facial expressions are so vivid and they're so brilliant. And I just love this two-parter.
I didn't watch that when I was
really?
rewatching,
That's
so
I'm that's maybe my favorite.
Because too, honestly, I was just like, I'm so glad you suggested this because, and I think this is the first time this has happened in such an intense way. I was like, I might end up watching like so much of this now because it's such a pleasure to watch it. Like, and it's been so long since I spent time with it, so I'm really enjoying this period in my life.
Oh, I'm so glad. I also have a random anecdote which ties back to censorship, and I cannot prove or disprove it because I swear to God I read this story on the internet like more than 20 years ago, and I can't find it reproduced.
All the proof has been erased.
there is a story of Bruce Timm complaining that for this two-parter, originally in the script, Grace, who is Harvey Dent's fiance, everyone is fighting, and Grace happens to punch the henchwoman of Rupert Thorne, and they immediately get a note back from Broadcasting Standards and Practices saying you can't hit a woman. And the team is like, really? But it's a woman hitting another woman. They're like, it doesn't matter. You can't hit a woman. And they're like, well, how would you suggest that we do this scene? And at some point, they come to a conclusion. I don't know who came up with this idea, whether it came from the Broadcasting Standards and Practices or whether it came from the creative side. They're like, why don't we have her pull her hair and kick her in the back? And then we're like, really? That's so much more vicious than just punching her. But that is what ends up on screen.
That's amazing. Wow, I'll be keeping an eye out for that.
Wow. Yeah, how do you arrive at that's like the better solution?
Sometimes, honestly, and I bet that just, if I had to guess, because I don't know, I bet that's a creative side thing because it just sounds like you're like, oh, okay, can't punch a woman.
Yeah.
So what else can I do? And then it's like, you can't say that I can't do that because I'm following the rule.
It's like so specific.
Which I love. Yeah.
It'd be hard to like complain. Like if you were the angry parent writing the letter, you're trying to describe like he pulls her hair and then like punch is an aggressive term that just comes out clearly.
You're like, they're having a conflict. It's not fighting.
Yeah.
They're just having a conflict.
There's I guess I've been thinking a lot about, because I see this pop up all the time, is the idea of like, you know, people that aren't versed in cartooning think of it as kids entertainment because like the language or the content that they've seen is in the language of stuff that is kid appropriate. So if there is violence, the world is so cartoony, everybody's technically safe. People stretch and bend and they only fall when they look down or whatever. But like Batman the Animated Series is not that. Like things happen to people. And I remember my like childlike brain feeling whiplash at that thought. Like moments when like a violent scene like that, Looney Tunes is violent as hell, but I didn't respond to the violence because the violence is zero stakes. It's more like creative embellishment. Whereas in this, it's like kind of literal for the characters. It's just such a different cartooning language. Like the types of conversations they must have had making the show and writing the scripts and like storyboarding would have been so different than other things that were going on at that time.
Well, yeah, like
it's
too,
so cool.
I watched the first episode, or like I think it's a two-parter. I watched it just to be like, I want to see where this began. And it's like Catwoman is in it, and this like Red Claw villain who honestly I was like, I don't recognize this person, so I don't know how.
It's Captain Janeway.
Oh my God, is it really?
Yeah, Kate Mulgrew. She plays Red Claw.
That's amazing! Wow,
she did a Russian accent before Orange is the New Black.
I can't believe I didn't clock it right away. Honestly, that's crazy. I might have to go watch it. Honestly, like one of the main issues that's going on in this two-parter is this like virus that would like if exposed would like kill all these people. I think it's like it's one of the early episodes. If it's not that, because I honestly don't remember the exact context of why this virus. All that to say, that's like an actual thing that will for real kill people, right? Like, again, that's not like, there's not a Looney Tunes episode, as you say, about like, oh, we better make sure that the poison doesn't get out and like kill all of the people in the village. Like, that doesn't happen. So it's like, this is, even though you don't see it, it doesn't happen. Like, they blow it up, which I do think is funny. At the end, there's like a big fire and explosion, whatever, and he's like, it's all gone. And I'm like, that still seems dangerous to me. Like, are you sure? Like, I don't know. It seems like it might be out now. I don't know. Maybe it's not airborne. But like, that's some actual serious shit, actually.
Yeah.
It's just like, first off, they were like, people could die. That's the story.
Yeah.
Batman saves them.
It's almost like they write something that would just be like an adult storyline, and then they're like, all right, what do we have to kind of soften to bring it down to like a kid thing? Like I feel like they were so ambitious, because sometimes you watch something, you're like, all right, this is writing exactly, they're not trying any harder than they need to get the job done. And those shows can be comforting and good, and I like a lot of them, but you can feel this one, they're constantly kind of like seeing where they can go, and then they kind of like they adjust it to get there.
Yeah, it's like you're just not going to see any blood, really.
90% of the time. Sometimes they still have I've Got Batman in my basement, which is still an episode I love.
That's true. Yeah, I guess we can't paint a picture like all 85 episodes.
There are a lot. It's a lot of content.
I feel like a lot of the ones, this must have just been how I was watching it, because I like maybe aged out by like the third season. But so many of the ones I remember are early first season ones. I took some notes of some ones that like scenes and like moments that really stuck in my mind. So a big one is like the like Batgirl death where she falls off the roof and lands on the hood of her father's car. Well, he doesn't know that yet, of course, but like, and that's a great moment with the audio. It's quiet, and then you hear the smash of the glass. Did you watch that one?
No.
Okay, it's worth looking up that scene. But it's like, imagine a kid seeing it. Like the way they play it is so adult. Like it reminds me of like some of the better car accident scenes in movies. And then like Commissioner Gordon gets out. It's like, oh, Batgirl has died. She's fallen on my car. And he pulls off the mask, and it's his fucking daughter.
Jesus, I can't believe I didn't see this. Wow, okay.
So that episode was part of the third season, which was the retool, The New Adventures of Batman, which for whatever reason is always less memorable than the original Batman the Animated Series. And I was like you, I had kind of aged out of the series by then.
I guess I was still watching it though, because I remember that one. Yeah.
Yeah, like by that point I would watch it like here and there. So what had originally happened was the first two seasons was intended for Fox Kids. It was done by Warner Brothers, but it was broadcast on Fox Kids. But then Warner Brothers got its own channel, and then they needed more content, so they had moved on to The New Adventures of Batman. They also redesigned it because Superman, the animated series, was airing, and they wanted to change the style to fit Superman, the animated series better so that they could do crossovers. I am of the opinion that I like the redesigns a little bit less because all the women kind of all look the same. I really like Bruce Timm's style of where all the characters have like these blade-like limbs.
Yeah, totally.
But for example, like some of the character redesigns are so pushed that they almost look inhuman. Like the Joker had lost his eye whites, and I always thought he looked like Yakko's scary uncle. And I think they realized that too, because for the Batman Beyond movie Return of the Joker, they brought his eye whites back, and he actually looks great in that one. Did you see any of Batman Beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember. I don't have strong memories of it, but I can picture what it looked like.
Because I remember thinking it was like cool and modern, but I don't have a lot of like specific memories about it.
Yeah.
So I bet I was like on the tail end of that kind of, and for some reason had watched like way more of Batman the Animated Series, but I definitely seen it.
So the context for why Batman Beyond was created was, at the time at Warner Brothers, the executives were like, you know what's hot right now? Teenage heroes, because you know what is our most popular programming right now? Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So they approached the creative team and they're like, is there any way you could make Batman a kid? And initially the creative team, was like, absolutely not. You don't understand what we're doing at all. But then they're like, wait a minute. We could do this idea, but like, what if we kept Bruce Wayne in the story, but by now he is an old man? So that way we can still have Bruce Wayne and we can still keep this in the continuity of the universe we've created. And now he is mentoring the teenager. And then that way they can have their like little high school stories and we can still tell stories about Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
And I actually really like Batman Beyond. Well, more specifically, I like the first season of Batman Beyond. I think behind the scenes, there was some studio interference for the last two seasons where they're like, could you make more stories that are more high school centric and less about old man Bruce Wayne? And then
old man Bruce Wayne is way more interesting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. I'm like, no, what happened to him? Ah, he got together with Barbara Gordon. No, I don't understand your ship. Who's
Wow.
Tim? I don't know why you root for this so much all the time.
Can I ask for a spoiler in that vein really quickly?
Okay.
Just because I don't remember it. Does he end up with Selena Kyle in Batman the Animated Series?
Sadly,
What?
no. But
it's so cute how much he's super into her like,
yes,
right away.
In the series, he has multiple love interests. He also has some stuff going on with Talia al Ghul, and then in the comics, and then in the modern series, now he has a son with Talia al Ghul, which I have always been against. But anyway,
Wow.
But I always felt vindication that in the episode Perchance to Dream, which is about Bruce Wayne's ideal world, guess who his fiance is? It's Selena Kyle.
Selena
It's
Kyle.
not Zatanna. It's not Talia.
They seemed really happy together. Well, they would. Yeah.
Happy
I don't know.
until he found out. Yeah, happy until he had his breakdown because he's not Batman in this world. That episode is actually
it just seems right.
Really fascinating because it's kind of like his subconscious is talking to himself, and then in that episode, at some point, when he discovers that his parents are alive, he was never Batman, Selena Kyle is his fiance, and there is a Batman in this world, and it's not him, they deliberately show these scenes where Bruce Wayne is bored and boring, and he has a session with Leslie Tompkins, who is not real. She is a character of her subconscious, and she says, I think your problem is you feel envious of someone who is a great man and you don't feel you are a great man. And it's almost like, although the Mad Hatter put him into this dream world, he's sort of wrestling with like who he is without Batman. And then by the end of the series, or by the end of the episode, yes, he has discovered that there's something wrong with this world. And he has discovered that Batman is actually the Mad Hatter. But the episode also implies he comes to this conclusion that he's like, I don't want to live in a world where I'm not Batman. So that's why it's time to jump off this bell tower.
He can't live a lie. I love that, where he's just like, that's all. He was just like, I just can't.
Yeah.
Like, I have to live my truth, basically.
Are there other cartoons for kids starring all adults with like adult themes in this way? I'm trying to think, because you're talking question about that, like, you know, the Joss Whedon, the Buffy, that era, and that kind of shifting this trend to be like kind of a different point of view of character. Like, what if teens now? And then it kind of, you know, a lot of things get aged down, like Marvel gets aged down, like all these big properties sort of like get reduced to like the kid point of view at some point. Like, is there a show that's kind of like like this with adults?
Great question.
About adult stuff?
Well, with Disney, this was actually cited as an inspiration for Gargoyles because Disney could see.
Ooh,
yeah, so Disney saw that Warner Brothers was capable of making a mature series for children, and they're like, we could do something like that. We could introduce something that was a little bit mature and had a little bit of darkness, and then they came up with Gargoyles, which is about adults.
The Gargoyles are adults?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can make an argument about...
they're very adults.
I assume they were Ninja Turtle age or something.
There are some of the Gargoyles who are like younger, but most of the stories are about Goliath, who is pretty much an adult, and he has like
he's like extremely a dad.
Yeah, he's got like a mean adult ex-girlfriend, and like he has an adult love interest who is the wrong species, and you know.
Got it. That show missed me, so I do have.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I loved that show. I know a lot of people in my age group loved that show, so they were dead on. It's like, it doesn't have to be about kids. It just has to be cool.
Yeah,
it just has to be super awesome. That is the only thing that came to my mind, and it's incorrect. False answer, but I was like, SpongeBob SquarePants is technically about adults.
Oh, okay.
But it is not serious in any way. So I find it kind of interesting that they are, you know, like they have jobs, like that kind of a thing. But that's it.
At
like
first
other than that, it's childish.
It's a fine line because it's a little different because they're gargoyles. They're not human adults, but also you could make the argument that a lot of the Batman characters aren't really like Batman is a human, but when he's in the cape and cowl, he's like an abstraction of a human. He's not really like a guy as much as he's like an amazing silhouette. And most of the villains are so odd in their proportions. They don't like the Penguin doesn't reflect a human that really. So I guess they're all not really humans.
You could say that Gargoyles, honestly, is like if Batman never was Bruce Wayne. Especially
Okay.
because they turn to stone in the daytime.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's no daytime activity. There's no human persona. But he's still kind of a guy. Because then there's I keep forgetting her name. But basically he has like a best friend,
Elisa
cop,
Maza.
who is like, yes. And she's really cool and savvy.
Did
And they
any of
have,
the
you know-
gargoyles have insomnia where they couldn't turn to stone at night?
No, but
during
that
the
would
day
have been an
and
interesting.
question.
That would have been an interesting
That's just my
premise.
only question.
I think because like one of the biggest dangers was if they get turned to stone, then sometimes people can smash them and
Oh,
they
that
die.
sucks.
So
Yeah.
they had to keep that in play. But-
Clayface gets smashed.
Wait, Gargoyles reboot. That's actually something I'd be really into.
Wow, I didn't think that's where this episode was
Yeah.
going.
Anyway, who do we pitch?
Okay, back to I do have there's one. I mean, maybe y'all have some other ones, but there's one episode that really stuck in my mind. Aside from all of the ones that are great that we've covered so far, the baby doll episode, is
I
that
didn't
her
see
name?
That one either.
Yes.
Did you watch that one?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I'd probably seen.
Amanda, you're doing a better job of like painting a picture of what episodes are about. Do you want to like just describe Baby Doll a little bit, or?
Okay, so Baby Doll is an episode about a woman who has a genetic defect where she forever looks like a little girl, even though she matures into a grown woman.
I remember this one.
And then
Yeah, sorry.
when she was a little girl, she was a child actor in a very popular sitcom where she played Baby Doll. And at some point, she decided she did not want to be pigeonholed as this character of like a cute little girl. And she tries to do adult stage productions, but like no one can take her seriously because
Yeah.
she looks like a little girl, and she becomes bitter and unhinged about that because this is Gotham and that's just what you do. And she ends up kidnapping her old cast members and trying to recreate the family she had because that was the only time that she felt truly happy. And, you know, Batman has to come save the cast members. And then this episode is particularly memorable for the way it ends because she runs into a fun house because, again, Gotham, lots of abandoned theme parks for
They
reasons.
just have those.
And there's such a beautiful sequence where she is in this room with funhouse mirrors, and then the final mirror, she says, gives her this distorted vision of her as a grown woman. And then she is like, that's me, that's the real me. But it's not real because nothing in my life is real. And she cries heartbroken to Batman, why couldn't you let me make believe? And after she has this big tantrum and destroys all the mirrors, you know, Batman doesn't do anything but put a hand on her shoulder, and then she cries and says, I didn't mean to, which was her character's catchphrase in the sitcom, and that's how the episode ends. And I'm like, they're so good at bummer endings.
Yeah, just hearing the
That one.
description of that, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, Twilight Zone, man.
It is. That's why I brought that one up. Yeah. And I think that one, it kind of captures this idea of Gotham in this cartoon world. It's tragic because it's not cartoony enough. Like if she kind of looks like a Looney Tunes-ish character design, like doesn't she have a gun or a weapon that's like a stuffed animal
Yeah, it's her doll.
on it or something?
It's her doll and Tommy gun.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that's so silly, but the truth of her life is so tragic. It's just like the idea of, and this again comes back to this Tex Avery thing because we just did it, but he was a creative director that injected noir into his cartoons, like more aesthetically, and like captured the vibe and the way they talk, and there's guns and stuff. But this is really noir in that like characters can't escape whatever weird fate is brought upon them by like the city and this creative team. Like it just seems like an episode that's about what they're doing with this cartoon. It's like, here's what this cartoon can do because this is not a cartoon in the way you thought you knew cartoons. But here's like a really cartoonish looking character. But when you learn who she is, it's like, it's too real.
Yeah, and it has like very mature themes about, you know, real life child actors who were not able to escape the roles that they were most well known for. Like, granted, actors like that generally don't have some kind of genetic defect that made them into an unhinged kidnapper, but
True.
With a baby gun.
yeah, and like that script was also done by Paul Dini, who did some of the best episodes, such as Heart of Ice and Harley's Day Out. And he also co-created Harley Quinn, Harley Quinn came from this animated series and now is such a popular character. Like she has
That's amazing.
Yeah, like she has her own HBO Max animated series, and she's played by Margot Robbie, and she has like her own movie. Well, her and like the other characters in Birds of Prey.
Right, yeah. They kind of like water. Yeah, that didn't quite work. It was kind of fun, but I
enjoyed that movie.
I wouldn't expect another one, I don't think.
No, but it did feel like we're giving her the movie.
But I feel like the comics and the animated series seem like very well received. I haven't watched or read any of them, but
I have to admit,
because I didn't know she came from, like, back in the day. I didn't know this was the Harley Quinn origin.
Yeah,
you know? I remember the first episode. Like, she's like his therapist, right? And then she breaks him out.
The first episode she actually appears in is Joker's Favor, and she doesn't have much.
Yeah, where she's just Harley Quinn.
Yeah, she's just like her henchwoman.
And
then later on, they wrote Paul Dini did a comic called Mad Love that showed her origin story, and then that comic was adapted into an episode. I have to admit, this is so immature, but when I saw this series, I was old enough to have preconceived notions of what Batman was, and I was already at 7 a Batman Catwoman shipper because of the Adam West series and Julie Newmar playing Catwoman. So Catwoman was actually one of my favorite characters, and although I love this series, they never knew how to handle Catwoman, probably because she's an ambiguous anti-hero, and then sometimes she does some thieving, and they don't know how to come that across in children. So oftentimes, a lot of her episodes, she usually needs rescuing, or she's turned into a cat and also needs rescuing, or she got like cat scratch fever and needs rescuing. And the creatives created this other female character, Harley Quinn, and they fell in love with her, and there's so much you can do with it. So there's so many more episodes about Harley Quinn than there are for Catwoman, and they're so much better. And then as a child, I was so bitter about that. And I'm like, who cares about Harley Quinn? Like,
I totally understand that. Yeah, I feel that so strongly. I didn't care about Harley Quinn until fairly recently. And I wouldn't say I'm still super attached to her in general, but like, I was like, oh, I kind of get it now. When I honestly think a lot of it was like the Margot Robbie iteration and different stuff like that. And I was just like, I see the appeal now. But like in this, I felt kind of the same way.
Yeah.
And that from the first couple episodes, which otherwise I don't think are that memorable in comparison to the other ones we've talked about of this show, or the Cat and the Claw, like Batman and Catwoman just have a lot of, like, they're having like a meet cute as Batman and Catwoman, and then they meet as Bruce Wayne, and like she buys him at like a date auction thing, and it's just like, you guys have a whole vibe. Like, it's so real. So
yeah.
if you have that set up and then it's taken away from you, like, I would feel the same way.
And I was a child, so I couldn't handle my big feelings about disappointment.
Yeah.
Like, that's why we were watching this. We were getting, we're learning a lot about adult themes.
Yeah, it's like almost like a bit of a soap opera type of flavor, a little bit, with some of that stuff.
Yeah,
like in a good way. Yeah.
One thing I like about the Cat and the Claw is that when they are civilians, like, Bruce Wayne is so intrigued by Selena Kyle, and she does not care about him. And she's like, I only bought you for the auction because the money was going to the Mountain Lion charity. That is actually, I don't know why this has become a quote in my household, but for some reason, my husband and I, out of context, will just be like, that money's supposed to go to the Mountain Lions.
Sure.
I totally get that, because she's yelling at people about it at least once in that, like, on the phone, just being like, I don't care what you have to do. Like, that was supposed, like, it was really good.
I think that characterization might have been created just for the animated series, because they're like, how can we make Selena Kyle as a character work for children? And they're like, animal rights, I guess. She's
like
environmentalist, I guess. We can't really do the.
She gets saved by a mountain
lion. We can do the thieving a little bit to introduce her character, but then we gotta, like, get away from that. This is for children.
It's like she just cares about the cat so much, which, like, I feel the same.
I love that line. I love that the show has lines about, like, fundraising and economics, because I feel like this must be the show. Because early on in this podcast, when we're talking about The Incredibles, for some reason, I'm like, how much money do these people make? Like, where are the budgets for superhero programming and all this? Like, for some reason, I'm very caught up in the economic stakes of the world. And I think maybe it comes from Batman being an introduction to, like, me being young, and here's what a cartoon world could be. It's like, people have jobs and they raise money for things and they donate money, and that determines whether they're good or bad sometimes. Like, these are things that are in cartoon stories.
Yeah.
In my mind, they need to always be there. Everything, I want to know the budget breakdown for.
Yeah, and it's like, well, what are you doing? Because
like,
if you're not passionate about this thing, then why are you raising
yeah,
money for it?
like in The Little Mermaid, what's even their currency? I don't know.
Sand dollars.
Yeah. Like, these are the things I need.
They do introduce adult concepts about the economy and fundraising more than I think the average children's cartoon, because there is an episode called Appointment in Crime Alley, which has to do with the area where Bruce Wayne's parents are gunned down. And then there is like a tycoon businessman who wants to buy up this area and then essentially gentrify it. And part of the plot of this story is Bruce Wayne is trying to fight against it as a civilian. And then they also introduce things like gangster arson because he wants to make this property unbuyable so that he can buy it all up. And as a child, these are very sophisticated concepts.
Yeah.
But again, that goes back to my earlier point that I made where I'm like, there's two kinds of stories that this series told. And as a child, I was more interested in the Joker kidnapping stuff than stuff about gentrification.
Yeah, I thought that in Heart of Ice that the guy who is like this businessman who is the one who shuts down like Mr. Freeze's program to save his wife, thereby like killing his wife and causing Mr. Freeze to like turn into who he is.
Yeah.
He was winning like a humanitarian award at the beginning. And at the end, Batman's like, you know, great job, humanitarian, like in a very sarcastic way. And I was just like, well, as a kid, I would have no idea what that even means.
Yeah.
And then it's like a very adult way to just be like, you're a false, you know, persona.
It's another character wearing a disguise, right?
Yeah.
Like, it kind of is. Yeah.
It's just like, that does feel, even just the word humanitarian, like as a kid, I'd be like, oh no, he's winning an award. Like, I don't understand. And now I'm like, oh, he doesn't actually care about people.
Yeah, that character was actually voiced by Mark Hamill in his first role in this series, because Mark Hamill was like, I would like to get onto the series, and he thought he was just going to do that one-off. But they said, why don't you come back and why don't you audition for the Joker? Because we are looking for a new Joker because of all that Tim Curry stuff. And then he signed on as a regular for one of the most iconic portrayals of the Joker.
Yeah, it's like everybody loves that.
Mm-hmm.
I think my concluding thought really of all this is like, we can all share some. I just have so many other thoughts. I'm trying to like, I'm getting to this. This is my last one. Okay. This idea that Gotham is a place and everybody's kind of defined in a way by their economic status in it. I love that is maintained in these, like, you know, like you said, it probably wouldn't exist if there were only like 20 episodes, but the opportunity to tell all these other stories fill out the world of Gotham. And I think that's so important to like this show carrying the Batman legacy from what it once was in the comics way back, and even in the 80s when they revive it, and even to now for a lot of the fans, because originally Batman was for adults, and it was a story about the times in which it was written. And I feel like that when things maintain that original intent or like the original inspiration, they're so much more impactful. Like if you do the Lego Batman and he's just like a guy who's moody and alone, that's cool. And that's a good story for kids. And it's a way to talk about family and friendship and all the important themes. But if you strip the idea that it was like adult men making comics about a city and like creating characters that express like their feelings about like the times, that needs to be there. Like, even if the times have changed, because it's like, that's what the character always is, right? Really. So that's my feeling part of why this show is so good. We actually didn't even talk about how good it fucking looks. It
looks, my concluding thought.
Like the cinematography is.
Yeah, my concluding thought. Well, it's like, we didn't gush about the opening title, except for a little bit at the beginning I did, but my God, and I can't say anything that people don't already know or have said, but like, wow, it's so good. Like, it's just so simple, like so silhouette driven. Song good, music good, imagery very good. The part where there's one specific shot where it goes back, it's a super close up on Batman's face and his eyes just kind of like squint a little, is like one of my favorites. Like I used to love that part in particular, even just watching this on TV. I don't know why. I was just like, yeah, it's Batman. Like, this rules. So it's perfect. Like, it's a perfect title sequence. Like, the aesthetic is amazing. And thought.
Well, isn't that their, well, before you go, Amanda, isn't that their, not like a proof of concept? Mm-hmm. Wasn't it like of the short that they made was based on, like, it kind of, they change it a bit, but.
Yeah, they did have
so right out of the gates, it was like.
Early version of it.
Yeah.
So good. Oh my God. Anyway.
So are we doing concluding thoughts?
Sure. I usually describe the end of this show as like we just drive Thelma and Louise style off a cliff and I figure out where to cut it. But I thought I would try to
Let's try to wrap it up. Yeah. Actually, that's true. You don't usually succeed to do that.
So my concluding thought is, and it is a rant disguised as a conclusion, I find at least once a year, there is discourse that comes around the concept of Batman, and it usually follows along the lines of like, why is Batman Batman? If Batman has so many resources, why doesn't he put it into the city, into social programs,
fundraising,
and charity fundraising? And yes, that is true, and that is valid, and that is actually addressed a little bit in the Robert Pattinson Batman. I am actually of the school of thought that thinks like that. The idea of Batman only works if you accept that Gotham is this uniquely bad city where there's so much corruption and there's so many problems and there's so many psychologically destroyed supervillains that this particular city happens to need a vigilante. And I think sometimes a Batman story is successful at conveying this and sometimes it isn't. But I think Batman the Animated Series walked that fine line extremely well because not only is it a beautiful Batman story, as I mentioned, it's one of my favorite series, and everything is working from the art direction to the writing to the voice acting to the music. But again, Batman as a character is so human and he's so compassionate and vulnerable, and like it is for children, and like sometimes there are episodes where he is fighting the Penguin's umbrella with a screwdriver, but there's just as many episodes where he's being extremely human and trying to help some supervillain or being Bruce Wayne and doing some kind of fundraising. And unlike the Batman that you see in this discourse is not the Batman I knew or the Batman I grew up with, because I love this version of Batman so much, and I think that means a lot to me. And this was also one of the major influences that inspired me to go into animation. And I think if you see any of my drawing, you can probably see the DNA of this series in it a little bit. So I'm really glad you gave me the opportunity to talk about this series. Thank you.
Oh my God, you know what? No one's ever said thank you.
This was really good. That's true. I don't know if that's true. That was an amazing concluding thought, though. And thank you for being on. Like, I feel delighted that I am rewatching this series now. It feels really good.
Yeah. I'm going to cut it at the thank you. And when we laugh, that's the end.
Okay.
Well, that's all for now. Amanda, thanks for joining us. Why don't you tell the people where they can find you and, what's going on? What should they check out?
Okay. You can find me online on Twitter. My handle is Amanda W.T. Wong, W-O-N-G. And you can find me on Instagram under the same handle, Amanda W.T. Wong. I also have a professional website where you can see my art on amandadraw.com. And I don't have anything to plug at the moment because we're still working on season 4 of Lower Decks, and there hasn't been an official release date for that yet because we're drawing it. But when it does come out this year, I hope you watch it because I genuinely love this series as a viewer and I love working on it.
I think Caitlin.
I absolutely will be watching it. No problem.
Yay!
Yes, I'm working my way through.
I think this season's going to be great.
Yeah, Lower Decks right now, and I'm like, oh, this was made for me. Like this kind of stuff.
All right, so when you're not watching Lower Decks, you can keep listening to the podcast, and all the old episodes are over there in your feed or at cartoonfeelings.com. And if you want to tweet at us or join us on Instagram, both of those are at Feeling Cartoons.
This is all true and correct. And if you're enjoying the podcast, which I hope is true and correct, please consider taking the time to rate us on Apple Podcasts, leave a review, share us with your nerdy friends. Yeah, or check us out on Patreon. Sling us $1 if you feel like it. We have some cool bonus episodes on there.
Yeah.
No pressure, though.
No.
That's all for now. Bye.